Hello and welcome to Nonprofit Problem Solver. We are now episode 45 and blessed today to have as my guest a good friend, Tammy Charles, right out of Tampa, Florida. And we are going to be speaking about corporate partnerships, one of our favorite topics that comes up all the time. But before we get into it, let me just say thank you to YachtMe as a show sponsor. This is the virtual events platform that you're watching on now. If you're listening to the audio, you can thank Glenn from PodPro Audio, making podcasting, professional podcasting easy. So, Tammy, how are things going?
I'm doing great. I'm hot here in Tampa, Florida, but we're surviving. We're making it.
Okay, so tell folks a little bit about your nonprofit experience, some of the things that you do, and a bit about what programs you provide or coaching or consulting.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Kev, for this amazing opportunity to just have this amazing chat. I'm super duper doped and excited about it. So yeah, my nonprofit experience started, I would say now almost a decade. So that's good. Have a little bit of experience now. I got my MBA at the University of Tampa. So I've always been passionate about business. So even when I started out my career, I've always tried to determine how can I kind of connect the business world with the nonprofit world. And little did I realize that that passion in that connection would lead me to where I am today, which is my expertise in corporate relations, like being able to speak that language of business and figure out how do we kind of like converge that with the nonprofit space. So my career started out in fundraising, just like a lot of us in this space, right? You know, did donor relations work. And then I transitioned kind of by accident into the consulting space. I started getting requests for, you know, people to work with me as clients. And then I've kind of just been in this space ever since. I'm also in the academic field, so I also teach. I teach some social entrepreneurship classes, business classes. So that keeps me kind of like cutting edge and make sure that I'm kind of staying on top of my craft. But that kind of like journey from, you know, MBA all the way to where I am now, it allows me to leverage both worlds, my passion for business and innovation and entrepreneurship, and integrate that with social impact in the nonprofit field. So yeah,
we've had a couple of chats about social entrepreneurship. I know it's another topic, and aside from this more narrow one that we might want to come to, we should also give a plug out to season 1 of the podcast when we were running in a panel format when we first started in the middle of 2020. We planned it before the pandemic, but we actually did them live on Zoom, if you recall, during the pandemic. And you were on the marketing and fundraising panel.
Yes, it was such an exceptional group of people. I just love the diversity of thought and experiences. I mean, all bases were covered. So it was really phenomenal group of people. Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. That panel was I think we got up to sort of 7 or 8 people on some of them. It was sort of an off the hook conversation. Anyway, I think those were, let's see, that'll be episodes 3, 7, and 11. So check out season 1. It's on YouTube. It's on obviously anywhere you get your podcasts. Those were interesting topics at the time because they actually still resonate now. They still have a shelf life, and people are still working out as we emerge from lockdown a lot of the same questions that we thought were right now. We got to know this answer right now, and right. And they still matter, those answers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it is just making, so I was going to quickly say I think a lot of it is just making sure that we're taking those lessons that we learned from last year and still applying them this year and moving forward, because it's very important, especially when we talk about, you know, corporate partnerships.
Yeah, and a lot of the practical, tactical things which we try to emphasize on this program still apply, even though the context is slightly different. So I think there's lots to learn. I was just going to ask if you, in addition to your teaching, your consulting, where would people find you online? And do you have any particular trainings or programs that you have going on right now, or anything that's coming up soon?
Definitely. So if you want to learn more about my work, I would say go to www.iamtammy.com. Super simple, iamtammy.com. You'll learn more about my work in consulting, training, some of the offerings we have. And And I do actually have a couple of trainings coming up. So I want to give a huge shout out to the Nonprofit Leadership Center. We're doing a virtual series on amplifying your communication. So last week we did a topic on pitching, how to really pitch your store and your organization for funding. Next Thursday, we're doing a training on mastering the art of storytelling, which is something I love to do, especially when we talk about corporate partnerships. Being able to tell great stories is so important. And then on September 2nd, I believe, don't quote me, I'm doing a training on personal brand, which is extremely important, especially as you're leveraging corporate partnerships, is really mastering your thought leadership. And I also want to give another shout out to the Nonprofit Marketing Summit, August 2nd through the 5th, I believe. I'll be a speaker talking about social entrepreneurship, how to master your pitch. And we're also doing a pitch competition. So if you want to learn more, I would say reach out to me, go to iamtammy.com. And I have a form there. Feel free to reach out to me to learn more about the trainings that we have coming up and subscribe to our upcoming newsletter as well.
That's great. And then the events, now we live in this sort of virtual world or the hybrid world, that platforms like YachtMe make possible. Are those going to be recorded with replays available if people are listening, say, later in 2021? Will they be able to go back and listen to some of those things?
I would say for the training that I'm doing, it's actually 4-hour training that I'm doing.
Oh, right. Okay. But
so
the summit
won't be recorded. But for the summit, that's a good question. I'm not sure. So definitely reach out to me. I'm not sure if that will be recorded or not. That's a good question.
Okay. And so find you at iamtammy.com. And is there a particular social media platform that you particularly like to use?
Yeah, I would definitely say LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and put in Tammy Charles, hopefully there's not a lot of Tammy Charleses, so you can look me up there. But that's where I'm really active. And I share all of my events and upcoming trainings on there as well. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So let's get into this. I know you get this question all the time. I get this question all the time. We see it in forums. We see it in discussions at any stage of nonprofit entrepreneurship. So people are starting out and maybe they learn that grants aren't going to be readily available, and they're trying to cultivate some individual donors, and then they start to reach out perhaps to some small businesses locally and other business people that they know, and this idea of corporate sponsorships and corporate partnerships comes up, as is the case for more experienced nonprofit leaders who have got to a point and they think, okay, now it's time, we need to reach out and spread our wings a little bit. We're no longer such a small shop. And again, this then becomes, how do we do this? And a lot of people make the mistake. I know I'm loading lots in here to let you just go off on things, but I know a lot of people will tend to restrict their thinking of corporate partnerships to event sponsorship. Who's going to buy this top level of sponsorship, or how do I set out my tiers to attract to corporate people? And I think, wow, that's such a small part of this big pie we've got here with corporate partnerships. All right, so I've just teed you up. Go.
Yes, so much. And I loved how, I want to go back to the beginning there, because you talked about, where are we at in our journey as a nonprofit? That's where everything starts. It starts with your strategic plan. That's where it starts. So if we're a smaller nonprofit, do we have the capacity to engage a portfolio of small businesses and corporations and corporate partners to engage them? Because partnering with a corporation, especially with the trends that we're seeing, corporations want a holistic partnership. So even in my career in fundraising, when I was a corporate relations manager, I realized early on that I needed to not just focus on sponsorships and logos. I needed to focus on how do we create strategic engagement. So I started designing holistic plans. All right, these are our volunteer opportunities. These are our in-kind. These are our financial. These are our PR. These are some ways you can help us innovate our programming. So I learned really early on, but I worked with an organization that had the capacity, the depth, the breadth, the width, the height, all of that. I had a marketing.
And it was your job. right? It was your job, right? This is the thing that I think people don't realize is that they might go through a local networking event and they meet people who run small businesses and they're talking to the CEO or maybe the number 2 in command, and that's great, but really, if you go larger to the larger fish, they actually have staff employed in a capacity to do corporate social responsibility or provide that sort of partnerships. And they're the ones who are actually looking for partners. Right.
Like that's their job. And the other piece about corporate social responsibility, in addition to looking for partners, just like, as nonprofits, we're vetting to make sure that corporate partner matches our values, matches our strategic direction, that corporate partner is doing the same thing. Because at the end of the day, one of the things I always share to nonprofits is, corporations have, and we're talking about corporations, we'll get to small businesses because that's a whole different game there, but corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to provide a return to their shareholders. And that's important for nonprofits to know, because corporations are built to provide that return, but they also know that in doing that, how do we provide a return to our community? And this is where nonprofits come in, right? To really help guide them and support them in that specific field. But I think it's important, for nonprofits to understand, when you're thinking about engaging with a corporation, really ask yourself, where are we at in our journey? What are our expectations, and what are those potential corporations? What are their expectations? If you go on their website, they'll tell you, we're looking for a partner who can do X, Y, Z. These are the areas that we fund. Do we match that? And then the other question we have to ask ourselves is, do we have the capacity to sustain?
Yeah.
There was a study done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I think it was like, 70% of, corporations, they're looking for nonprofits to be able to sustain that relationship. So it's not just every year fund our, luncheon or our dinner gala. How can we sustain this relationship throughout the year? How can we make it,
So I like that. So I want to just tie back to the idea of a strategic plan, and I'll use this term motivation. What is it that as a nonprofit you are looking for from a corporate partnership? And obviously partnerships succeed when it's a win-win. So you don't necessarily have to be balanced in any particular dimension, but you both have to feel like you're getting what you want out of it. So a nonprofit, their motivation really for a corporate partnership has got to go beyond just the money, because that's just too superficial to interest most corporate partners. That's what I hear you saying.
Yes, definitely. And it actually really starts with who you're serving. So usually when I, talk to nonprofit leaders about where do you start in the conversation about corporate relationships, it starts with your beneficiaries. So say, for example, if my beneficiaries are, people who struggle with homelessness or trying to address the issue of racial injustice and so on, it actually starts there. What do our beneficiaries need? And how can we leverage our partnerships in order to best serve and optimize social impact for those beneficiaries? So it really starts there. Now, what does it look like strategically? A tool that I love to use, and I'm a little bit of a geek, but I love this tool so much, is this.
There's definitely scope for geeking out in this podcast. So we do it all the time with extra. If we get into the alphabet soup sort of jargon thing, we might have to spell things out a little bit. But
yes, and I won't do that. I promise I will make sure to keep them out. But there's this tool called a balanced scorecard. And if you think about the balanced scorecard, was developed by Kaplan, and a lot of organizations, they tend to measure their success by how they're doing financially, right? So he developed this concept called a balanced scorecard because he recognized that not all organizations, every organization should not measure themselves just by financial success. They should measure themselves based on how they're doing operationally, how are we providing value to our customers, how are we providing value to our donors, and so on. So the reason why I love using this tool is because it helps simplify. So we're looking at a strategic plan. Let's kind of categorize, how can we look at our organization holistically? What goals do we have as it relates to our operations, our finances, our partnerships? And then after we've used that tool, how can we begin plugging our corporate partnerships into our overall organizational strategy? So, and what's really helpful about that too is you can actually build out your packages, your corporate packages, your proposals based on that specific balanced scorecard.
Because you're going to have to do that work anyway. I mean, imagine this has never happened ever. Never happened where a strategic plan says, get corporate partnership, and they assign it to somebody, and then they move on, because the corporate partnership is going to fill some sort of hole. Now, the person who's assigned to do that is going to have to do all that strategic work, or they're not going to get very far. But what I want to pull out here, your view on that has to happen as part of the strategic plan. It can't just be an implementation phase for a member of staff or a board member or volunteer, whatever, just fill all that stuff out, because it really has to go to the heart of what the organization's doing, as you said, who it serves.
Yes, that's very true. So this is the reason why we start with what are our goals as an organization first, and then how can we begin plugging our corporate partners in to help us accomplish those goals. It's the same thing as if, so corporate partnerships aside, say, for example, we're looking to partner with the local government, or we're looking to partner with a local school district. We would do the same type of work. We would say, how is their alignment as it relates to serving our beneficiaries better, making sure that we meet our outcomes. We would do the same due diligence. I think we need to treat corporate partners as the same kind of like stakeholder. They're a part, they should be in that process of vetting, and how do they fit our strategic goals and our strategic plan. It's the same process.
So that's great. I love that. And I'm not, it seems sort of obvious when we say it. Oh, well, they're a partner. You've got to treat them like all partnerships. Okay. Yes. Great. I get that. But there is something different about corporate partnerships as opposed to, say, a local government, who you might think might be a purchaser of your services or a funder, to serve a particular point of community. And there's obviously a policy dimension there to it. But with corporate partnerships, I think that the challenge is thinking of them beyond just the financial resource or the marketing muscle of a local brand.
Right. And what corporations bring to a partnership for a nonprofit is that they not only have the financial engine, right, but they also have, I mean, you think about a major like multinational corporation, you have access to a plethora of employees. So say, for example, you want to start a new program. I remember I actually did a partnership where we were starting a new program and we wanted help with the market research. We wanted access to data. And so we didn't, we're a nonprofit. We didn't have kind of like the organizational capacity to do that, but we partnered with a corporation who that is what they do. They do consulting for major multinational firms all around the world. So employees gave their time, about, I think it was like 5 hours a week or so, to really help us map out and design our program. And they loved it so much that they ended up kind of underwriting a portion of it. So we had this amazing strategic partnership where we were able to build out this incredible, fascinating program. They loved it. And then we got their headquarters to come in, do a check presentation. So that is what that looks like, is how can we leverage the innovations that corporations are already doing? And how can we, add value to our organization's strategic goals and outcomes?
So really, what we're starting if in terms of this question, this problem that we're trying to address is, how do I build corporate partnerships? You have to ask yourself as a very first question, why do I want a corporate partnership? What am I hoping to get out of the partnership? How does it fit in with where we are right now, what our strategic plan is, and the people we serve? So in other words, how could a corporate partnership fit into that situation? So you have to be able to answer that question first.
Yes.
But then you may not have the second question that we talked very at the beginning. You may not actually have the bandwidth to sustain or to even pursue those partnerships. And it may be that in the short term, you're going to spend that time that you have, your time and energy, cultivating more major donors, for example. And you have to make these choices and trade-offs within your shop, right?
Right. And I think to go back to that first question about how do I build corporate partnerships, I want to just make this easy for those who are listening. Once you look at your strategic plan and you've built in your packages, like these are the areas where we can plug in our partners. The next step is actually the easier steps, I believe, right? So
Mm-hmm.
your major gift, so those of you who are, really familiar with individual major gift fundraising, it's the same process. I promise you, you'll prospect and qualify. And what I love about corporate partnerships, about the prospect and qualifying, is especially for your major multinational firms, right? Your kind of larger organizations, they'll tell you what they fund, right? Like we are Coca-Cola and we fund health and education, youth empowerment. We're Bank of America. We fund low to moderate income populations. They'll tell you who they fund. So prospecting and qualifying already happens. Now cultivation is easier because now you're reaching out to that CSR director and saying, I looked on your website and I see that you fund low to moderate income populations. We do that too at our nonprofit. So I wanted to reach out. Prospecting, qualifying, cultivation for corporations, that process is so amazing and seamless because the information is on the website. Now, the hard part is persistence. Because when you send out the first email, maybe 8 times out of 10, you may not get a response. So you have to be creative. I've had to do LinkedIn searches, do whatever I can to make sure I can get to the right person. But at least, you have access to so much information. So you can prospect, qualify, cultivate. Solicitation is easier too, because you already know what you're asking for, because you already know what type of proposals they fund. And stewardship is amazing because corporations will tell you how they want to be stewarded. And then the other piece is evaluation. So that whole major gift strategy that we use for individual donors, overlay that same process for your corporate donors as well.
So would you say that they're like, in addition to like any partner, that in a sense they're similar to foundation style grants in that there's explanation on the website about what they're interested in. Now they may not have funded programs like foundations often do that say, we're looking at grants of this level, but often they do. They say we're interested in partnerships up to this value and so on. But I get a sense that they're a bit more flexible because they want to tease out what they can actually get out of a partner. Is that fair?
Right. That is very fair. One thing I will tell you is before you apply for a corporate foundation grant, just like you would do for a regular foundation grant, build that relationship. This is where our major gift hat, we put it on. One thing I learned, again, early in my career was, I would go on a corporation's website. Well, I'll go on Dell Foundation or Google Foundation, their website, and I would see, and they'll tell you RFPs, send it on this date. But I knew that I wanted to have a conversation because those conversations is where I got insight on how do they want us to organize our grant. And I actually partnered with our grant writer in order to make sure that based on the conversation I have with that corporate partner, based on the insight that they gave to me, how do we position our proposal to maximize funding? I've even had corporate partners tell me what I should ask. They're like, you're not asking for enough. You need to ask for more. I actually doubled one gift to a 6-figure gift because I sat with the foundation and they told me like, y'all don't ask for enough and you're asking at the wrong time. I know our website says this, we really love you. You need to ask for more. That came, and I love sharing this story. I get goosebumps all the time because it shows that relationships are everything. At the end of the day, focus on building relationships.
Yeah, that's where I think we were. I think we were headed. And the way I wanted to frame this is that behind this idea of a corporate, and there may be a Fortune 500 brand, a household name of some kind, but there's a person there. So just like we said at the top of the show, that there's a person in a job whose role it is to work out all these ways of partnership and to find nonprofit partners. That person is still a human with preferences and curiosities and a personality and somebody you need to connect to.
Yes, I absolutely love that. Like, that's why when I've done my prospecting and qualifying, I'm looking for a person. So a quick hack, if you're doing some research, I love building relationships with kind of like your market directors, because they're the ones who handle a lot of the sponsorships. HR folks within a corporate entity, they handle a lot of the engagement and volunteerism. How do we get our employees involved? Obviously, if you can get someone in the C-suite or the VP level involved too, they can help expedite giving and the process. So that 6-figure gift that I got that doubled came from someone who's at a senior level piece of this organization, part of this organization. But at the end of the day, what drove the partnership were the relationships that we were able to build. And for me, what helped me as a fundraiser is I made sure to build relationships with people, even within my organization, even within the board of directors, to help amplify that partnership. Like, okay, if I was kind of like, say, for example, I was a corporate relations manager. I wasn't at that VP level, but if the VP level director was interested in building a relationship with us, I made sure maybe our CEO was involved or our board member was involved.
Right.
All of that is, how do we make connections? How do we get people to connect, to converse in order to build? But this is going back to what we talked about earlier, to sustain the relationship is actually what sustains that sustains that partnership.
Yeah, but so at some point, what we're saying is that, in a sense, what may, in terms of the initial prospecting and filtering and cultivating, look something like a sort of foundation. Just like in those cases, you want to connect to the program manager. There's a human there who's going to make a decision,
right?
And so the relationship you have with that person doesn't prevent, doesn't work around their standard decision-making process, exactly. But it gives you a lot more information so you perform better through it.
Exactly. And one thing too, I want to just share really quick about the difference between having an engagement strategy and a communication strategy, because obviously all relationships, our friendships, whatever, it takes great communication to sustain any relationship. So when you're in the process of building your corporate relations program, think about, some ways that you can build in kind of like a seamless communication strategy. Like how do we communicate at the level of prospecting? How do we communicate? What is our communication strategy when we're cultivating? Make sure that that's in place. Now, engagement is different.
So before you crack on to engage, can you give some examples of what that would look like? Because I think this is where a lot of people listening are. They're thinking, I don't have the partnerships. I'm at this point of engaging or communicating. So what does that look like when they're laying it out to have it so that they feel like they have it in place?
That's very good. So I would say if you can use a simple CRM, customer relationship database platform, it makes this process a lot easier to manage. So just FYI, there's cost-effective options out there. But when it comes to communication, so say, for example, we're talking about how do I build corporate partnerships? You went on the potential corporate partners website and you see that they give to an area that you specialize in. That initial email, right? That initial touch point is, hi, I was viewing your website and I saw that we had mutual interests. I would love to set up a time for us to share about what we do. We'd love to share about your goals, and then move that along. So that initial kind of conversation is pretty intuitive. I went on your website, I saw what you've done or what you're interested in. We do something similar. Can we set up a time to talk? You want to drive that partner, that potential partnership to some sort of a Zoom or, face-to-face conversation. And then when you get even into cultivation, so say that you've built that partnership and now you've been talking to them about your programs and now you're like, I think we're ready to ask, or we're ready to do and ask for that corporate partner. It's just making sure that you're explicit about that. We see that you've been engaging with us. We would love to learn more about your financial giving programs. How can we partner with you financially? Because you see that you're passionate about X, Y, and Z. So a lot of it is, I think when it comes to communication, show that corporate partner that you've done your research, right? Show them that you're interested in meeting mutual goals. And honestly, how that's happening, it's happening through a phone call. It's happening through a personal touch via email. You also want to make sure that that corporate partner is subscribed to your newsletter in some way to keep them updated on what you're working on. And you also want to make sure you're calling, right? You want to make sure you're calling that person. So the how is that personal touch email, that phone call, and making that as simple as possible. And then the higher level communication strategy is making sure that they subscribe to your email, your newsletter, they're following you on social media and so on.
So it's also clear from doing those things that this isn't an overnight thing. This is not, drive-through partnerships.
No.
I'd like 2 corporate partnerships, please. Right. You've got to cultivate, or just like any partnership and any relationship, this is not instant.
Yes, very, very good. And it's a conversation. You're constantly, I can't even begin to express how I was actually reading just the other day an old email that I sent to a corporation where in the notes I put something like, they told us, so we had a conversation. I asked them to evaluate the partnership. I asked them, how are things going? How do you feel about it? And they were like, we really want to engage with this program. You haven't told us about this. Like, are there funding opportunities? Like, they were asking us,
what can we pay for?
Yeah, what can we pay for? I had another meeting with another organization where I gave them an update on everything we were doing. Update meetings are very important. If you're about to start a new program or start a new partnership or whatever it is, make sure you're letting your corporate partners know, or even your business partners know. Because I remember I had a meeting with a corporation. I told them everything we were working on, our strategic goals, which is very important. And they were like, oh my goodness, we're not giving enough. We're only giving 10,000. We need to figure out how we can give more. And like, they were talking amongst each other. Like, I let them deliberate, and they were like, we have not been giving enough. So the purpose of communication is to engage, inform, persuade, kind of like your typical communication strategies. But you want to constantly update your partner. What are you working on? What are the challenges you're having? Like, COVID-19 has busted all of our butts. So it's a really good time, if you haven't yet, to be honest with what you're going through and leverage your partners to help you kind of think through. Let them be your sounding board. Let that foundation or that corporate partner you've been working with be your sounding board to say, what should we do? What are we not thinking about? They love things like that. So those are different ways to sustain that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So those make sense. You mentioned earlier that they tell you how they like to be stewarded, and we know, this is one of the things. It's very easy to drop the ball because as soon as the check clears, your priority is to speak to somebody else probably. But we want to embrace people as they have basically come into the tent, or perhaps they've increased their contribution from the last time. When you say that they tell you how they want to be stewarded, can you give some examples of how they tell you and what they know and how that might be different from other sorts of partners?
Yes, I love that question. So I would say have that conversation early. When you're in the process of submitting that proposal, I actually put an addendum, potential stewardship strategies in that proposal. I always do it. And then we have a conversation. Hey, here are some ways that we typically steward our corporate partners. Are these meaningful? The key word is meaningful. Ask them that word, ask them that question with that word.
Yeah, meaningful. Yeah.
To you. And so when we're having that, so say, for example, they gave us a gift and we're excited about that gift, we'll tell them, I'll send an email and say, thank you so much for your gift. We typically thank our corporate partners through a check presentation, a press release. What are some other meaningful ways can we, thank you? And they'll tell you. So some typical ways that I've heard, especially now, like I've had some conversations with corporations recently, and one of the things that they love to see is, how can you share us a story of how this funding will support your mission? We want to share this with our employees. That's a huge.
They want to see the impact. They want to see it at work. They want to be able to claim, because their objective is basically delivered through the gift they've made to you, and you're the one actually doing the work. They need to see it.
I love that. Yeah, their objective is delivered through the gifts. Absolutely love that, right? Because you are helping them meet their objectives as well. So make sure, and the biggest thing this is where we're going back to our earlier conversation about capacity. Do we have the capacity to sustain corporate partnerships? You want to make sure that you have a system to document your relationships. You want to have a system to document your stories. How did that specific gift impact your beneficiaries? How did it transform the lives of the people that you serve every day? That's important for you to know, because again, going back to the balanced scorecard, how are we meeting our outcomes? But then you want to let that corporation know your gift, this partnership, this engagement is transforming lives. So and
can it also be the benefit of the gift may be to core operations? We were actually able to sustain our programs because we could, fund the IT system that we needed. We were able to do these other things that were not traditional programmatic costs. But if you want to support us as an organization, you got to help us live and survive as an organization.
That is so good. So I actually helped the client write out a proposal for them to fund their marketing plan. And then we basically told them, you know, our ability to communicate to our stakeholders will allow us to achieve more health equity in our community, right? So you always want to, because at the end of the day, your mission is to make an impact. When you operate more effectively, if you look at the balanced scorecard, right? The reason why we're measuring ourselves in all these areas, because it actually allows us to produce more social impact at the end of the day. So when you're able to tell, hey, yes, we need you to fund our marketing plan, but this marketing plan is going to accelerate our progress and our ability to serve more people. If you can make that, you know, case in point, you're good to go. But yes, most definitely.
Do you find that corporate partner, and I know, and it's a broad generalization, but corporate, because they typically work in the for-profit world, as opposed to say foundations and that sort of thing, do you feel that they are more sympathetic or open-minded to not just the operational or overhead question, but just to ROI in general? That if you make this investment in, say, marketing or a system, or, you know, this pilot program, that if it works, it delivers this benefit. I mean, I find that a lot of nonprofit conversation sort of avoids this ROI framework, you know?
Right. And I think, you know, going back to that question, I think there has been a disconnect between, you know, corporations and nonprofits as it relates to operations. Like I've helped to write proposals where the corporation feels like, you know, 30% just to operations is too much. And this is where we've had to educate our private sector that, okay, if I don't have overhead, who's going to run the program? Is the program
Let's go talk to your own finance director and see what your overhead is for what you do.
Exactly. You know? I'm so confused right now. So we've had to educate. Like I've actually had like really open and honest conversations with corporate partners, and I said, 10% is we're not going to be able to sustain this program. That's like half of one person. So we've had to, these are why dialogues are so important, because they're like, oh,
but the percentages, I mean, those broad categories are just silly because you can categorize people in different ways. I mean, it just becomes sort of accounting. I was just curious that whether your experience of people were just, you know, thought about it differently than we often talk about in the sector, and what foundations often have relatively hard and fast rules about overhead, and they're not typically sympathetic to the ROI conversation, because just as that 10% threshold suggests, they're more interested in programs rather than in organizations.
Right. And I think ROI speaks the language of corporate partners. Another, you know, term that I hear a lot in our sector too is social return on investment. So what is the economic footprint or the impact? It's something to include in your proposals as well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just summarize here a little bit that we want folks to be, if you're thinking about corporate partnership, on the one hand, it's like any other partnership, and it's got to be aligned strategically. You can't just throw in your strategic plan, oh, we'll go get a corporate partner, just like you couldn't say for any other type of partner. But then you basically put on your prospecting and filtering and confirming and cultivating and all that sort of thing. And in a sense, it's actually quite easier because there's a lot you can do online and digitally. But behind the scene, there's ultimately a human to whom we want to make that human one-to-one connection and develop the relationships. But there is some broader flexibility than we might expect with, say, foundations, because of the for-profit environment in which corporations work and so on. So we got some flexibility there. So what am I missing there in terms of what people ought to be doing? What else would you add to that list?
And the other thing I would add to that list for nonprofits is really do some analysis of your core offerings, because just like there are multiple ways for a corporation to engage with you, you should also in turn provide multiple opportunities or methods for a corporation to, for you to engage with a corporation. So say, just for example.
So core offerings, by the way, core offerings, you don't mean your programs for beneficiaries, you mean core offerings to corporate partners.
Yes. So some examples of that could be obviously financial. These are ways you can support us financially. These are some volunteer opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your typical volunteers opportunities. This is where I get pushback from my smaller nonprofits, and I get you, I hear you. But because you're a smaller nonprofit, you may need help with, you know, batching some of your gifts or making calls. I don't know, but you can actually get someone to volunteer their time to do that. So something to think about, think outside the box. But what are those engagement opportunities? And then non-financial, this is another piece we don't talk about a lot. You know, what are some of those in-kind professional service gifts or opportunities you provide? So core offerings is essentially what are the ways a corporation can engage with your mission, not just financially, but as it relates to volunteerism and engagement or some of those non-financial needs that you have. We need more computers. We need paper, whatever it is, diapers. What are some of those other ways can they engage with you? So make sure you think of those things ahead of time. I think the biggest thing I really want to make sure everyone understands is that try to build out everything you possibly can ahead of time. Your proposals, what you can offer to a corporate partner, stewardship, cultivation, your communication strategy, especially if you're a smaller organization, if you can build that out ahead of time and create a standard operating procedures, it makes that relationship, you're able to sustain it because everything is planned out. And then after that, you're
what you're saying is, sort of enter this prepared, right?
Yes, yes.
Which leads me to my last question. And you started at the very beginning when you talked about bandwidth and so on. Who shouldn't be going to corporate partners? Who is either not ready or not appropriate? I mean, at what point, what's a test or a question you can ask yourself as a founder or an ED, even a board chair, but some nonprofit leader says, this is not the right time?
Great question. So my answer is everyone can. I think every organization should reach out to corporate partners, reach out to the small businesses in your community. Small businesses are amazing because they give from their businesses and they give personally. So it's like a double blessing. So please do not ignore your small businesses. And especially if you're a smaller nonprofit, reach out to your small businesses. Now, when it comes to who should not, a lot of it is, if you're a part of an organization that doesn't understand that everybody, it's all hands on deck on fundraising, then you should not be reaching out to corporate partners. The job of reaching out to corporate partners does not fall just on one person, aka the development director.
Okay, there we go. That's one thing I think we could really amplify. It is not a single person's job.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it is. And I honestly, if you're a smaller organizations, I have spoken to smaller organizations all across this country. And one of the things I've mentioned is, definitely leverage your board. Now, if your board doesn't have a culture of philanthropy, this is kind of like where we need to do a little bit of, a cultural overhaul, because the board is a significant contributor. I've worked for smaller organizations where I leaned on my board to help us raise significant amount of dollars from corporations. So the board is critical. So if you feel like you don't have the support you need in order to sustain or build corporate relationships, this is where we have to take a step back to determine, are we actually prepared? Any organization can, we just need to have everybody on deck, all hands on deck.
Right. And again, it's that trade-off with your time and energy versus vis-a-vis, events and major donors and that sort of stuff. So and really, I guess the question is, what I'm going to put some words in your mouth that you can confirm or deny. Right. But if you don't even have the bandwidth to prepare in advance, build out those things that you talked about and think through who's really connected to your strategic. If you don't have time to do that properly, this is probably not on the cards for you until you do have that time.
Yeah, and focus on your individual donors then. Like, there's different types of giving. If you're more grant ready, then focus on your foundations, focus on your individual donors, focus on building a really good board. Like, the board is make or break for any organization. So focus on those areas first. A corporate strategy is just, and one thing I want to quickly say too, when you think about overall giving, corporations contribute 5 to 10% of the overall pie. Most giving comes from individual gifts. That will never change.
That will never change. Right.
Don't be worried if you're like, oh, we don't have a corporate strategy. If most of your donors are major gift donors, that's who's mostly giving. So that's totally fine.
Right. Right. No, I think that's a great way to wind up and put it in context, that it can be a hugely valuable, not just financially, but in lots and lots of different ways. But again, you've got to approach it from the right perspective. And I think importantly, recognize if you're not ready to do that. You're probably better off cultivating more individual donors and working those relationships. Fair?
Definitely. Fair, very fair. Love it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tammy. Always a lovely pleasure to speak to you. Do you want to remind folks where they can get in touch with you and what social media they're likely to see you bouncing around on?
Yeah, definitely on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the quickest way to get some updates. Tammy Charles, Tammy Charles, and then www.iamtammy.com.
iamtammy.com.
Yeah.
That's great. I don't want to even consider the spam you must get to that account. Okay, this has been Nonprofit Problem Solver, the weekly live video podcast. This has been episode 45. We are going to see you next week at the same time, which is Wednesday, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.